Harps have been known since antiquity in Asia, Africa, and Europe, dating back at least as early as 3000 BCE. The instrument had great popularity in Europe during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, where it evolved into a wide range of variants with new technologies, and was disseminated to Europe's colonies, finding particular popularity in Latin America. Although some ancient members of the harp family died out in the Near East and South Asia, descendants of early harps are still played in Myanmar and parts of Africa. Other variants defunct in Europe and Asia have been used by folk musicians in the modern era. The earliest harps and lyres were found in Sumer, 3500 BCE, and several harps were excavated from burial pits and royal tombs in Ur. The oldest depictions of harps without a foropillar can be seen adjacent to the Near East, in the wall paintings of ancient Egyptian tombs in the Nile Valley, which date from as early as 3000 BCE. These murals show an instrument that closely resembles the hunter's bow, without the pillar that we find in modern harps. The chong flourished in Persia in many forms from its introduction, about 4000 BCE, until the 17th century. Around 1900 BCE, arched harps in the Iraq-Iran region were replaced by angular harps with vertical or horizontal sound boxes. By the start of the Common Era, robust, vertical, angular harps, which had become predominant in the Hellenistic world, were cherished in the Sasanian court. In the last century of the Sasanian period, angular harps were redesigned to make them as light as possible. Light, vertical, angular harps, while they became more elegant, they lost their structural rigidity. At the height of the Persian tradition of illustrated book production, such light harps were still frequently depicted, although their use as musical instruments was reaching its end. Mesolithic-era paintings from Bhimbetka show harp playing. An arched harp made of wooden brackets and metal strings is depicted on an Indus seal. The works of the Tamil Sangam literature describe the harp and its variants, as early as 200 BCE. Variants were described ranging from 14 to 17 strings, and the instrument used by wandering minstrels for accompaniment. Iconographic evidence of the yawl appears in temple statues dated as early as 600 BCE. One of the Sangam works, the Kalatam, recounts how the first yawl harp was inspired by an archer's bow, when he heard the musical sound of its twang. Another early South Asian harp was the ancient veena, not to be confused with the modern Indian veena, which is a type of lute. Some Samudragupta gold coins show of the mid-4th century CE show, presumably, the king Samudragupta himself playing the instrument. The ancient veena survives today in Burma, in the form of the song harp still played there. While the angle and bow harps held popularity elsewhere, European harps favored the pillar, a third structural member to support the far ends of the arch and soundbox. A harp with a triangular three-part frame is depicted on 8th century Pictish stones in Scotland and in manuscripts, e.g. the Utrecht Psalter, from early 9th century France. The curve of the harp's neck is a result of the proportional shortening of the basic triangular form to keep the strings equidistant. If the strings were proportionately distant, they would be farther apart. As European harps evolved to play more complex music, a key consideration was some way to facilitate the quick changing of a string's pitch to be able to play more chromatic notes. By the Baroque period in Italy and Spain, more strings were added to allow for chromatic notes in more complex harps. In Germany in the second half of the 17th century, diatonic single-row harps were fitted with manually turned hooks that fretted individual strings to raise their pitch by a half step. In the 18th century, a link mechanism was developed connecting these hooks with pedals, leading to the invention of the single-action pedal harp. The first primitive form of pedal harps was developed in the Tyrol region of Austria. Jacob Hochbrucker was the next to design an improved pedal mechanism around 1720, followed in succession by Krumfoltz, Naderman, and the Aird Company, who came up with the double mechanism, in which a second row of hooks was installed along the neck, capable of raising the pitch of a string by either one or two half steps. While one course of European harps led to greater complexity, resulting largely in the modern pedal harp, other harping traditions maintained simpler diatonic instruments which survived and evolved into modern traditions. In the Americas, harps are widely but sparsely distributed, except in certain regions where the harp traditions are very strong. Such important centers include Mexico, the Andean region, Venezuela, and Paraguay. They are derived from the Baroque harps that were brought from Spain during the colonial period. Detailed features vary from place to place. The Paraguayan harp is that country's national instrument, and has gained a worldwide reputation, with international influences alongside folk traditions. They have around 36 strings, are played with fingernails, and with a narrowing spacing and lower tension than modern Western harps, and have a wide and deep soundbox that tapers to the top. The harp is also found in Argentina, though in Uruguay it was largely displaced in religious music by the organ by the end of the 18th century. The harp is historically found in Brazil, but mostly in the south of the country. The Andean harp, also known as the Peruvian harp, or indigenous harp, is widespread among peoples living in the highlands of the Andes, Quechua and Aymara, mainly in Peru, and also in Bolivia and Ecuador. It is relatively large, with a significantly increased volume of the resonator box, which gives basses a special richness. It usually accompanies love dances and songs, such as Huayno. One of the most famous performers on the Andean harp was Juan Cayamba Pimampiro Canton, Imbabura Province, Ecuador. Mexican jarocha harp music of Veracruz has also gained some international recognition, evident in the popularity of La Bamba. The arpa jarocha is typically played while standing. In southern Mexico, Chiapas, there is a very different indigenous style of harp music. A number of types of harps are found in Africa, predominantly not of the three-sided frame harp type found in Europe. A number of these, referred to generically as African harps, are bow or angle harps, which lack four pillars joining the neck to the body. A number of harp-like instruments in Africa are not easily classified with European categories. Instruments like the West African kora and Mauritanian ardin are sometimes labeled as spike harp, bridge harp, or harp lute, since their construction includes a bridge which holds the strings laterally, vice vertically entering the soundboard. While lyres and zithers have persisted in the Middle East, most of the true harps of the region have become extinct, though some are undergoing initial revivals. The Turkish sang was a 9-string harp in the Ottoman Empire which became extinct at the end of the 17th century, but has undergone some revival and evolution since the late 20th century. A similar harp, the chani, survives in the Svaneti region of Georgia. The harp largely became extinct in East Asia by the 17th century. Around the year 1000, harps like the vajra began to replace prior harps. A few examples survived to the modern era, particularly Myanmar's songgok, which is considered the national instrument in that country. Though the ancient Chinese konghu has not been directly resurrected, the name has been revived and applied to a modern newly invented instrument based in the Western classical harp, but with the strings doubled back to form 2 notes per string, allowing advanced techniques such as note bending. The harp is a stringed musical instrument that has a number of individual strings running at an angle to its soundboard. The strings are plucked with the fingers. Harps can be made and played in various ways, standing or sitting, and in orchestras or concerts. Its most common form is triangular in shape and made of wood. Some have multiple rows of strings and pedal attachments. Ancient depictions of harps were recorded in current-day Mesopotamia, Persia, and Egypt, and later in India and China. By medieval times, harps had spread across Europe. Harps were found across the Americas, where it was a popular folk tradition in some areas. Distinct designs also emerged from the African continent. Harps have symbolic political traditions and are often used in logos, including in Ireland.